This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. As British royal dynasties go, the Stuarts were unfortunate to say the least, in particular when we think about the rebellions that emerged against their rules. Mary Queen of Scots was imprisoned and forcibly deposed by a collection of her nobles in favour of the rule of her infant son James. Mary's grandson, Charles I, would be defeated by parliamentarian forces during the English Civil War. He was then put on trial for treason, convicted and executed. His second son would also encounter his own struggles, and that is what I intend to look at today. But before we jump into today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring another video on this channel. When it comes to building and updating and managing my website, Squarespace has really made all the difference. Squarespace's Blueprint website design tool offers a massive variety of website templates, all of which are super easy to customise in every way. This is due to the Fluid Engine website design system. With this, it's simply a case of dragging and dropping. For even more convenience, you can edit your website not only on your desktop, but also on your phone. I can also keep track of my website traffic through the whole bunch of useful analytics tools that Squarespace has on offer. Above all, it's been really helpful for me to keep an eye on my mailing list emails. I can make sure they've all reached their intended destination, but I can also see if or indeed when they have been opened and what links in them are being clicked. So if you have signed up to receive emails from me, but you have yet to see any of them, please have a little check to make sure those emails haven't somehow been caught up in your spam filter. To build, launch and manage your own website, go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And then, when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/readingthepast to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But now, it's time for us to take a look at the so-called Glorious Revolution, and in particular, how it got to that point. Our principal focus for today is King James II of England and 7th of Scots, which is what he became following his brother King Charles II's death on the 6th of February 1685. James's coronation took place in Westminster Abbey on the 23rd of April 1685. However, just a little over 3 years later, on the 23rd of December 1688, James was forced from his throne and his country, because on that date, he would flee into exile in France. In this video, I'm hoping to lay out some of the key factors and events that preceded and arguably resulted in this shortened reign, which was then followed by over a decade as a king in exile. And subsequent and connected to this is the foundation of the Jacobite movement, which would provide an alternative to successive recognised British monarchs for the better part of a century. Now, I do intend to focus on the Jacobite movement and its figureheads in a future video, which I do hope you will find useful and enjoyable. James was born on the 14th of October 1633 at St James's Palace in London. His father, King Charles I, had been ruling for a little over 8 years, having inherited the crowns following the death of his father, James I and VI, on the 27th of March 1625. The James we're looking at was the fourth child born to his parents. Charles I's wife and queen, Henrietta Maria, had been first delivered of a short-lived son. Following this would come James's surviving brother Charles and his sister Mary. James came next. More pregnancies followed, 2 of which resulted in the birth of children who would live into adulthood. A relatively peaceful early childhood for James did give way to an adolescence and early teens that was overshadowed by challenges to his father's rule, civil war, and eventually the execution of his father on the 30th of January 1649. James was just 15, when his father was beheaded on a scaffold that had been built for the purpose outside the banqueting house of the Palace of Whitehall. James had been with his father and elder brother as hostilities between the royalist and parliamentarian forces started up. He was nearly captured at the Battle of Edgehill on the 23rd of October 1642. His liberty would not last forever. Indeed, in 1646, following the surrender of Oxford, James was taken captive. He was held with his younger siblings at this time, when, later on, James received the news that his father had also been captured. He is said to have reacted furiously. He did, however, get the chance to meet with his father in person. At this time, King Charles I reminded James of the loyalty that he still owed to his elder brother as the rightful future king. Charles also encouraged James to find some way to join his mother and brother in safety and exile in France. As it was, he would finally mount a successful flight from England in the spring of 1648. The teenage James disguised himself in girls' clothing. This had been provided to him by some loyal helpers. He then boarded a boat, first to Tilbury, before transferring onto a ship that took him to the Netherlands and The Hague. This brought him to the safety of the court that was being presided over by his elder sister Mary and her husband, William II, Prince of Orange. At the start of the following year, James would join his mother and brother in Paris. Not long after he completed this journey, he would learn that his father had been executed. James's response to this news is, however, unrecorded. I would imagine, especially as the Commonwealth appeared to be a stable entity, that the surviving Stuarts in exile must have had at least some doubts that they would ever return to either their realm or the throne. They also, presumably, would all have been acutely aware of just how devastating the loss of even part of their subjects' love and loyalty could be, both to their rule and also to their lives. Surely, early experiences like this, that took place in some of James's formative years, must have had an effect on the man, and eventually the king, that he would become. While he was on the continent, and in his mother Henrietta Maria's company, James was the recipient of her attempts to convert him to the Roman Catholic faith. These attempts appear to have had little effect on James, at least for the time being, and this perhaps might in part be explained by the fact that James's brother Charles had instructed him to do everything he was told by their mother, unless it dealt with matters of faith. Additionally, James's time in exile on the continent offered him the opportunity to gain military experience, on campaign with first French and then Spanish forces. The death of Oliver Cromwell on the 3rd of September 1658 seems to have represented a shift in how the exiled Stuarts viewed their opportunities in the lands they had left behind. The failure of an early uprising would have surely dimmed these hopes. However, within months, the protectorate of Oliver's son, Richard Cromwell, had utterly fallen apart. In May 1660, James accompanied his brother Charles as he sailed for England to make ready for his coronation. The interregnum was over, the restoration was underway. At around the time that Charles's restoration to the throne would have looked like a nearly foregone conclusion, if not probably a little before, James had informed his brother of his desire to marry. At first, Charles refused. After all, considering the changes that were afoot, James's marriage would soon become a matter of state, important to the succession and a potentially valuable diplomatic tool. James may have met Anne Hyde for the first time in 1656, when she accompanied his sister Mary when Mary visited her brothers. Anne Hyde's father had been Charles I's leading advisor during the Civil War. After the Royalist defeat, he then joined the court of his former master's son, Charles. Sir Edward Hyde's wife and children did not join him at this time. Instead, they stayed in the Low Countries, which put Anne in the ideal location to be chosen by Mary, as someone who would serve with prominence in her household. By 1659, Mary was receiving regular visits from her brothers herself. James, was courting Anne during these visits. Anne would find soon enough that she was pregnant, and Charles would eventually grant permission for James and Anne to marry, privately, on the 3rd of September 1660. Anne gave birth to a son, named Charles, perhaps for his uncle and king, on the 22nd of October 1660, so fairly close to that marriage. Pressure was put on Anne, on her family, and on James, to renounce Anne's claims that James was the father of the child, and also that they were legally married. Charles II stepped in. He denounced these objections and stood firmly by the legality of this marriage. Anne and James's first son lived for just a few months. They would, however, go on to have more children. Indeed, there would be 8 children born to this couple in total, of which only 2 would live past infancy. They had 2 daughters, Mary, born in 1662, and Anne, born in 1665. Charles II had married 2 years after his brother. He had married Catherine of Braganza, the Roman Catholic daughter of the King of Portugal. Catherine's faith was one of the things that made this marriage unpopular, at least at first. Over time, she would win the love of her subjects. However, while her husband would father a number of children, none of Catherine's pregnancies would go to term or result in a live birth. As each year passed without the arrival of a legitimate heir for the king, it became increasingly evident that the crown would likely pass to Charles's brother James and to his heirs. Increasingly, though, that realisation was being appraised with some concern. This concern emerged on account of the faith, or perhaps the suspected faith, of those involved. At some point in the late 1660s or early 1670s, the precise date is unknown, it seems that both James and his wife Anne became convinced that Roman Catholicism provided the only way to salvation. When Anne died in 1671, James ensured that his wife's religious conversion was respected. In 1686, he would even publish her reasons for converting. As for James, he began refusing to take communion in the Church of England during 1672. The following year, 1673, saw the passing of the Test Act. This made it illegal for, quote, popish recusants to occupy certain important offices. As a result of this, James swiftly resigned from his post as Lord High Admiral. Also in 1673, on the 30th of September, James remarried. His new bride was a devout Roman Catholic, Mary of Modena. King Charles II did not support his brother's religious conversion, but he did permit this second marriage to take place. The king took a special interest in the upbringing of his nieces. He ensured that whatever their father and stepmother might believe, indeed whatever their mother might have believed before her death, Mary and Anne would be raised resolutely in the Church of England. On the 4th of November 1677, Charles II gave Mary away at her wedding. It was he who had arranged this marriage, and his niece's groom was his nephew, his sister Mary's son, William. William was the Protestant Prince of Orange. James was apparently not happy about this marriage for his daughter, but seems to have realised he had little choice but to defer to the king, his brother, in this case. His willingness to give in on this matter would, however, not be replicated in relation to his own faith and its practice. He was, seemingly, absolutely steadfast in his devotion. So steadfast, in fact, that some who thought they might one day be his subjects were growing concerned. In 1678, Titus Oates alleged there was a, quote, popish plot to assassinate Charles II so that James could succeed him on the throne. Some of Oates' confederates even claimed that James himself was involved in this plot against his brother. These allegations fuelled the exclusion crisis, as it came to be known, where members of Parliament sought to find some legal way to prevent James from ever claiming the throne. Charles found himself under increasing pressure to remove his brother from the line of succession. Some would advise James that he must renounce the Roman Catholic faith in the hopes that the situation might be calmed. James refused. And so, at the start of 1679, King Charles II ordered his brother James to leave England. As the political threat posed by his faith and also his place in the succession had not abated, if anything, it was getting worse. James stayed in Brussels until the September of that year. At that point, news reached James that his brother was dangerously ill, and so he sped back to England. Charles had recovered by the time James arrived, and so he promptly sent his brother away again, this time up to Edinburgh. And James would remain there for the majority of the period between October 1679 and March 1682. By this point, the unrest had calmed, at least to a degree. But there would be many in the English Parliament whose relationship with James had been irreversibly strained. Many others had come to actively dislike him and in fact dreaded the very thought of him as their king. James, for his part, viewed the parliamentarian moves against him as evidence of a continuing Republican sentiment, that same sentiment that had killed his father. James thought that his faith was simply being used as an excuse for those who just did not want a king. However, the worst fears on each side seemed to have been unrealised following the death of King Charles II and the accession of his brother on the 6th of February 1685. He was, if anything, popular, at least at the start. His coronation in Westminster Abbey on the 23rd of April 1685 did, however, not include the usual communion, on account of him being a Roman Catholic. Quite how a Church of England, which has the monarch as its head, could have survived long term when that monarch in fact held a spiritual allegiance to the Pope as head of the Church is quite the conundrum. James was suspicious of the English Parliament, fearing they might seek to place restrictions on his revenue in order to keep him in line. These suspicions, though, proved to be just that. As it was, he was treated to the same financial terms as his brother had been. However, there would be problems soon enough. Within months of his accession, James was faced with two rebellions that he had to put down. In the West Country of England, his brother Charles II's son by Lucy Walter, who was James, Duke of Monmouth, rose up against his uncle's rule. Monmouth termed that rule a usurpation from him. Meanwhile, from Scotland, Archibald Campbell, Earl of Argyll, also rose up. Both of these rebellions were successfully and fairly swiftly suppressed. The ringleaders were executed. James hoped that he could see the Anglican faith joined by the Roman Catholic faith as twin, equal, established religions of England. That the prohibitions on Roman Catholics playing a role in the life and the running of the nation might be overturned. He would attempt to bring this to fruition at various points throughout his reign. He wished, for example, to see the Test Act, the thing that had removed him from office during his brother's reign, repealed. And so, James issued his declarations of indulgence in both 1687 and 1688. These declarations mirrored those that were attempted and ultimately abandoned by his brother during his reign. James was less willing than Charles to back down. He wanted religious toleration. He wanted to suspend the penal laws against Roman Catholics and also against Protestant dissenters. He insisted that his declaration should be read in all churches from the pulpit. 7 prominent churchmen refused. They did more than this. They put together a petition, signed it, and had it published, saying they should not be forced to read this in their churches. And so, James ordered them to be tried for seditious libel. The churchmen were acquitted on these charges on the 30th of June, 1688. This acquittal came just days after the birth of the son to the king and his wife. James Francis Edward Stuart, which I'm aware is basically 4 first names, was born on the 10th of June, 1688. After nearly 15 years in this second marriage, King James II had a legitimate male heir. On account of male preference primogeniture, this baby boy jumped ahead of his elder half-sisters in the line of succession. Those elder half-sisters were, by this point, both in their 20s and married, because Anne had married Prince George of Denmark in 1683. For those nobles and politicians who could, at least for a time, grudgingly tolerate the rule of the Roman Catholic James, safe in the knowledge that his rule would almost certainly be followed by one of his Protestant daughters and their presumed heirs, this birth was a massive blow. Because now, a Roman Catholic succession was firmly in the offing. To make matters worse, it seemed that James saw the birth as evidence of divine providence. A sign that God was on his side, that God supported his Roman Catholic faith and the changes he wished to make in his nation. James was willing to generate a sufficient glut of peers so that he could pack Parliament with individuals who would smooth the way for his preferred legal changes to pass. Swiftly, rumours started to do the rounds. These rumours were apparently heavily supported by James's daughters Mary and Anne, and the rumours were that Mary of Modena's pregnancy and birth were in some way questionable. There was even a story that, in order to fool the 40 witnesses to this birth, another woman's baby had been smuggled into the Queen's bed inside a warming pan. Now, having seen a warming pan, that means this was either a very tiny baby or an almost comically large warming pan. In any case, a letter dated to the 30th of June 1688, which was the same day that those churchmen had been acquitted on that charge of seditious libel. This letter, signed by 6 nobles and a bishop, individuals remembered by history as the, quote, Immortal Seven, formally invited William of Orange to invade and remove James II from the throne. The king, aware of this coming threat and recognising its magnitude, attempted now to offer concessions to Anglicans and to the Church of England. This was all, however, apparently too little too late. James's son-in-law and nephew, William, landed in Torbay on the 5th of November 1688. Before the end of that month, James had sent his wife and son away to France and to safety. William would take London without a fight on the 18th of December 1688. His father-in-law and uncle managed to, or perhaps was permitted to, slip from his Dutch guards in order to escape, to join his wife Mary and his son little James in France on the 23rd of December. James made landfall in France on Christmas Day. William and Mary were crowned in a joint coronation on the 11th of April 1689. Their revolution was already being referred to as glorious by this point. Indeed, that term was officially attached to it from the January of 1689. But why was it so glorious? Well, in the speed of William's success, the efficacy of his invasion, there were those who saw evidence of divine intervention. Much has also been made of the fact that this was a, quote, bloodless revolution, which it was, if you are prepared to ignore the resultant bloodshed and extreme loss of life that this revolution generated in Ireland. Additionally, as James II and his son, also James, were still alive, and since they, and those who supported them, believed that they and their heirs were the rightful rulers of Britain, the question, or rather challenge, regarding rightful rule is something that will continue to emerge, sometimes violently. The Latin for James is Jacobus, and it's from this that the Jacobite movement drew its name. But as I said at the start, that is a topic for a future video. So what do you think of the glorious revolution, of the moments, the events that led up to it? Was this avoidable? And if so, what would have been required for events to have played out differently than they did? Perhaps, though, you think it was unavoidable, and if so, I would love to know why. As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I would also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, and the more engaged the video gets, the more YouTube claim they share it out, and that will help to grow this community. As we've been talking about the Glorious Revolution, maybe we should think about battle-y emojis or maybe kingy emojis. I'm looking forward to seeing what you will pick. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the other place you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like the channel, let your pals know about it. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you're subscribed, have a little check now to make sure that you haven't been unsubscribed against your will. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear, and that way YouTube alleges. They will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next planning to go live, which I do to talk about the history news, and I know you're not going to want to miss that. We have now got a failsafe. Head to my website. It will be linked, www.katrinamarchant.com. And as you can see, if you go to the contact page, there's a box. Put your email in that box and that will add you to my mailing list. That way, I will email you once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to share with you some links for my content that will be coming out in the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.